Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. And for those of you who don't know, I'm Ruba Katrib, Curator at SculptureCenter. Before we start, I just wanted to mention that the next program that we have coinciding with this exhibition is July 21st. We're presenting a selection of readings by writers in collaboration with Abe's Penny, and also Wiseblood, a musician in Philadelphia, will be performing as well. And then we're having an annual summer members party following that, but more info will be available soon. But mark your calendars if you're interested. So this panel is, last week we had a panel with the curator of this exhibition, Christian Meyer-Stoll, who's at the Kunstmuseum in Liechtenstein, and she, with other art historians and curators and artists, and they discussed Bill Bollinger's work in depth. And this panel is called Unidentified Influences, which brings together a group of artists working right now who have parallels, overlaps, interests in Bill Bollinger's work. And really the intention of this panel is to talk about this idea of influence, this line, there isn't like a straight line between Bill Bollinger to artists working now, because he was largely unknown until fairly recently, or known in limited quantities, just because of the nature of the work. And so we'll talk about his work, we'll talk about what these artists find interesting in his work, what has compelled them in his work, and related artists. And then we can also have an open discussion, I think, because I'm sure many of you have opinions or things you would like to add, and questions you might want to pose to the artists we have here, which we have Virginia Overton and Kilian Ruthemann, who actually has a show opening Friday at Clearing in Brooklyn. So if you want to see his work there. I mean, no one's showing images of their own work, but they'll talk about it, so hopefully you can get a sense. And if you have your iPhone, maybe like Google a little bit if you need to.
Distract yourself.
Or later, you can check it out if you're not familiar. And Rachel Foullon. Virginia and Rachel live in New York, and Kilian lives in Switzerland most of the time. Yeah, but has been in New York for a little while now. So if you guys have questions, please feel free to raise your hand and jump in. We'll open up for Q&A at the end, but I think we can have more of a conversation if you'd like. So, sorry, I keep dropping my pen and it makes like that noise. Okay, so I think just to give you some background on Bollinger and his life, which I think we just can't extract from the work because of the circumstances of his life, his work, and his early death in 1988 at the age of 48. He was working in the 60s and 70s. He dropped off the map for a little while before he passed away, and his peers included Richard Serra, Eva Hesse, Barry Leva, and many other artists of that time. He was in all the major exhibitions of the 60s, or most of them at least, When Attitudes Become Form, 9 at Leo Castelli, Anti-Illusion at the Whitney. And when he died, he had been living in relative obscurity, so he wasn't, it wasn't like a tragic art world event. People didn't really notice that he passed away. So, of course, we've seen images of his work, and if you're looking at catalogs of those exhibitions, you've seen his name probably listed, and this is really the first opportunity to bring together a good chunk of his work. A lot of it we don't have access to, and make sort of a presentation in the United States. The show originated in Europe and traveled around in Europe, and this is the only venue in the US that's showing this American artist's work. So I think we can start. I mean, the interest in this panel is to hear from these artists, so I'm going to turn it over, and I think it would be great to start with maybe a very basic question, which would be, how you each found out about Bollinger when you first experienced his work, probably in print versus real life, and what you thought of it, if anything struck you in particular, we can sort of go with your initial response and then kind of get a little deeper as the panel progresses. So maybe we can start down the line. Do you want to go first, Virginia?
We're going to go in order. Okay. I hadn't ever seen his work until this show, actually. I'd seen a lot of reproductions of it. I first saw it when I was in school in Memphis. I had sort of a really traditional education in college, and my sculpture professor really loved to show just tons of images and stuff. And it was always really exciting. We'd also go see work and go to weird places and look at things. But so the first time I saw his work was in one of these classes, and always bugged me to have to be in a class. I wanted to be doing things and not sitting there looking at images. But it turns out it was good for me, I guess, because I saw his work back then, and it was literally from a slide library, and our professor would go and just search through these massive stacks of slides. I don't guess anybody does that anymore. It's you Google whatever you want to see. But I remember there were just maybe 2 images or 3 at the most of his work, and they were really terrible slides that some grad assistant had taken from a book or a magazine. And so the quality sucked and everything. But I just remember being struck by the what little information there was in the slide, because you look at the work and initially it seems like such a minimal gesture, right? There's barely anything there to look at, you think, at first. So that was the springboard for me, I think, initially, back then.
Well, I didn't know him, actually, to be honest. Only since a year I've heard about the show, which was in Liechtenstein, close to Switzerland. And I haven't seen the show either. But the pictures I've seen, I've got introduced by somebody about his work, and she said, you really have to see it. And then I noticed that it would really make sense to know more about it. And this really, this simplicity what he has, with a lot of strength in his work, very precise gestures. That's really what me myself interested in my work as well. So I'm really glad that I see here for the first time his original works.
I was unfamiliar with the work when I was invited to do the panel. I did a quick kind of Google search to make sure I wasn't going to be totally out of my league in terms of, it's okay, this is, and I think maybe we'll get into this, but the first thought I had was, okay, it's that kind of work. And I thought, okay, I can talk about that. And then I didn't want to spend too much time doing that. I sort of thought, well, if there's the opportunity to see the exhibitions, I'll just sort of have that more pure experience, since I guess it's rare to have the opportunity to kind of freshly encounter historical work. So I saw the exhibitions. I saw both the one at August Greenspan and the exhibition here, and I think the first thing that really struck me was I thought about, and that I could kind of relate to immediately, was even though the exhibitions are obviously posthumous, I thought about, wow, there's a performance that has to happen during the installation phase in order for these works to become, in order for this raw material to sort of become a sculpture. And I thought about sort of the emphasis on that period, or sort of saving a stage of production for the exhibition site, and then sort of having a private performance and creating the works, which I think is different, and they're sculptures, they're discrete sculptures. It's not like it's working in a way of installation art. So that was something that I was just starting to do. I just did a first exhibition kind of working that way this spring, and I don't know, I don't even know if I thought about it as a private performance until I was doing it myself, and I think I had kind of standard performance anxiety and sort of the arc of that during that phase of my own installation, but that was something I sort of connected to right away.
So I think each of your practices kind of have these overlaps? I mean, was there something? I think for Kilian, maybe when you first saw this work, did you feel like how did I not know about this artist? Was there sort of like a surprise, or did you feel like this kind of work has kind of been carried along through time and is sort of just present now? Like, why is this so relevant today? Why do you think you have this kind of relationship to this work?
I must say I wasn't really overwhelmed when I see it the first time. But I'm still sort of try to get closer to this work and find out about the qualities, because most of them I don't really feel like super aesthetic experiences that I have when I have it. But some do really work like this, and I think now I got so much stuck. But I think it has a relevance, and it is from another time, obviously. I think so. I wouldn't do it the same way he would do something like this, but I have really this connection of touching materials and turning them in a very simple way and using them in a exactly the wrong way they are actually made for. But he is also doing unnecessary gestures, not for what you would use them for, but for producing an artwork. But I love to see them, and they're super historic, I think.
Virginia, do you have?
Oh, I'm like, yes, and that. I guess I liked, Rachel said a minute ago that she was struck by his saving the performative aspect for the installation, and I love that idea because that's what I do, and that's a good, I procrastinate, but I like saying saving that part of it for for the installation, because I do think there's something about that that's super unique in his work, and it was in that the show where he rented out the whole floor. Stare at Lee building. I think that was a huge part of it, was sort of performing all these acts and seeing what happened and trying things over and over again. And, finally, at the end of this month, after doing all these things, what accumulated was kind of the recognition of that activity. And I respond to that very much. And I feel like at the best of times, that's the kind of work that I make, when you've tried something over and over again, and then finally there's some either distillation or a balance, and maybe not a literal balance, but in your mind a balance of how things have come about. But it can also be kind of slapstick, when you're performing these things. I can imagine trying to twist that piece of fence would be a challenge, and you'd keep trying again and again, or I totally love the video of him standing the pole up on end. I get it. I totally, it makes so much sense to me. Sorry. Damn it. It makes so much sense to me because it's it speaks to the way life is too. And so that, to me, it's when those two things come together, that's such a beautiful thing. It was just, him in this shot outside with a pole and trying again and again. And I guess some of his contemporaries, there's that video of Sarah trying to catch that lead.
Lead, yeah.
That's the title, right? Okay, I was the one. But so, or even, I guess there are tons of examples really if you start thinking about it. But I think those are beautiful gestures, and it's brave to try them, and it's also kind of scary. It seems so simple, but it's really, it's a really complex thing to think about.
What do you think has changed? Why is that relevant now, and what's changed? I think because of course there's a a lot has happened, but why? I mean, do you think this performative kind of poetic element is what's relevant now, or is it more like a treatment of materials? I mean, is there a certain thing that strikes you or speaks to you in terms of an urgency that you can correlate to your own work right now, or work that's being made today?
That's such a hard question to answer. Humans invented the wheel like forever ago, right? But we still keep trying to make a better one, or like a cooler one, or make one that turns better, or goes faster, or smoother, or whatever. And so maybe it's like that, So I think it's human nature to try and try again, and try to pick up where one person left off, and maybe take it in another direction, or see what you can do to change the trajectory of something.
You have a question? Okay. No, you can.
I don't want to comment on it, but I'm really interested in what Rachel was saying about this performative gesture, because I think that, and I think this is exactly part of it, that like now it seems performative. I don't know that Bollinger would have ever thought of it that way at all. I don't think performance was really part of his artistic lexicon or any of those artists, except where really the process art. So someone like Sarah and the lead pieces, and I think one of the, I think we talked last week about a lot of people look to graphite piece and think about Sarah's splash pieces. He's splashing molten lead across there, and that is about that gesture and that process, and gestures are part of the work. Whereas this, I did photograph art scholar making that piece. It seemed like, it was like a private performance to us, but I think for the work itself and for the artist's intent, that has nothing to do with the work.
Mm-hmm.
It's really like, it is like, it obviously embodies the result of how it was made, and that was, not there. But I think the way that we think about it now, we can lead to this idea about that performative process.
So you're saying
that moment, that would not have been.
There was a clear distinction between process and performance, where now is that?
This was like moving into process art,
Well, maybe performance is the wrong word, but I guess there's something improvisational about like working with the materials, that you kind of know what they want to do, and you're like expecting a certain amount of cooperation from them, and they're sort of like your co-conspirers or something, I think. And so, yeah, maybe, it's not theatrical, it's not, but there's something, I guess, about that improvisation and let's make the magic happen now that I think is interesting.
What I can see in his work is that he's really like the lust to do something, to be a sculptor and to let things happen, like turning stuff and like dancing with this pole, or just spit it somewhere into the water. And I think it's about the process of being a sculptor, and that's probably that making. That's why he was doing it, and possibly not to show what he's doing exactly, but what's the result of it.
Right.
And then this process is embodied in his work always.
Like a document, or
like the sculpture itself, probably as a document
yeah.
of an action.
Yeah.
Possibly not even made by him. It's possible to do his work, his sculptures, without his presence.
Yeah, he often gave instruction and had instruction for his work, so it was made by others. But I think when you have a show like this, you can't help but think of the presence of the artist, or the missing artist.
But I can imagine that also these people who installed this work would have fun in it, like putting tension into a rope and also like turning this the fence. I keep saying it, and to see the fun part of it, and also like balancing water and that stuff.
There's sort of like an animation that has to occur, and then I guess to remake the work, there's like a reanimation. Like you sort of have to like give it the like spark of, I don't know. There's something that I just keep, when I first saw the work, kept thinking of that word. It's like the sculpture has to sort of stand up and like say hello, and that's like when it's done or something. I think of that with the fence piece. There's like this moment where it's like kind of alive, and then there's all these moments in between where it's not. And that's sort of the crescendo of it or something.
I mean, what do you, in terms of material, I feel like, you know, Bollinger was, of that group of artists, one of the few first artists just to take an industrial material and, you know, manipulate it, but not fabricate something totally, totally different. And I feel like, I wonder if you guys have any opinions on his use of material in relation to your own use of material, or what sort of different thing?
I think there was a kind of an ease with letting materials be present and act the way they're going to act. There's not such a force put on them, like in, you know, minimalism. You see that, you know, these like typed objects, you know, very refined and clean. But I think in his work, it's sort of less about that, you know, more about kind of the way the material will act in the world, given the world's own pressures, like gravity or whatever. You know?
But I think they're quite precise made. They're very like.
Yeah, I don't mean they're just like slapped together or anything like that, but I think there's, it's more about a communication maybe, or an understanding he had of the material and letting it kind of do what it was going to do. Not, you know, I mean, when you drop a log in a river, you know, it's going to go down the river or float or get stuck on a root or whatever, sink. So he couldn't plan that out. Right?
Can I say something?
I mean, especially the rope piece, I think it's extremely precise and extremely controlled. That's why I don't know if I like this, of course, the sculpture itself, but the action itself is a very controlled, not too, like using all these industrial materials, but they used to do this to bring tension into a rope. And that's why I much more like this freer work, but like in his video work where he's doing like the log piece, and also just the fence is a very simple action, and then when he's making this super controlled thing, I think it loses a bit in the freedom of like and the lust.
I guess to your question about the use of industrial materials, like we live in such a different world in terms of availability to an artist. Like, I mean, you know, in descriptions of him living on Crosby and Howard, I just imagine him like going down to like the hardware store and buying like whatever rope they had, like whatever eye bolts they had, like whatever he could get. And like now we just live in this world where you can get absolutely any size of anything from anywhere, and if they don't have it, you can have it made. Like
Home Depot.
To me, yeah, there's, I mean, MasterCard. I mean, there's just like the specialization of industrial materials that artists, you know, have at their disposal makes making work like this today such a choice. Like, it means, I don't know, it's just entirely different. Industrial materials are just, it's just different. I don't know. Anyone else has any thoughts on that?
I mean, do you think it means something different as well? Because there's, you know, an inherent kind of meaning with these types of materials.
I mean, to just choose the most basic chain link. If you were to make an artwork out of the most basic chain link or most basic, I mean, it's almost quotational at this point because you're choosing that. I mean, yeah. I mean, I was even thinking, you know, I understand that the wheelbarrows had to be custom made to look like a historical wheelbarrow. Is that, before I move forward, is that true?
That's, the wheelbarrows are a conservation.
Well, they had to be shipped from Europe.
Yeah.
Are they original or they're new?
The replacements, okay. Because the originals rusted through, but it's an original art.
But that's really interesting because, I mean, like, if you were just going to, you know, flat-footedly follow his instructions and buy 2 wheelbarrows today, I mean, they would
look totally different.
Be hideous.
Yeah.
There's some pretty good wheelbarrows out there. You have to know where to look.
New ones? Okay.
Yeah, but there isn't. I mean, I think you're making an interesting point because the standard product now is not, or material is not. I mean, the standardization is completely different, and there are so many different types of materials.
Yeah, I would be really curious what he was doing, how he would work right now with what material.
Yeah, that's my question too. You know, would he use new materials? Would he use the materials available at the corner store, hardware store today, or would he, have become attached to his aesthetic, his signature aesthetic from the 70s, and actually try to almost reproduce that?
Yeah, but it's still so regular material, like this fence is still here, and you still use these joints to tighten ropes.
Yeah, it's standard, but you could.
It already existed for about 50 years or no, much longer. I don't know.
I don't know. Wait, check.
You don't know either.
Are there any questions from the audience at this point? Yes.
When I kept looking at this and sort of the graphic, I kept thinking back to this, I guess a video of Rachel Foullon.
Wait, hold on one second.
I don't need that.
Oh, yes, you do.
Mark showed Tucker how to make these string drawings, and it was all about think about this thing, feel this way, move your body like this, and then whatever the result of that is how the work should be. So I was wondering sort of when these are reproduced, if there is any of that, or if it was he does it once, it is photographed, and then it is always reproduced based sort of more on a photograph, because I feel that has a lot to do with attitude, towards the work. And also, I had just seen Rachel's show in LA, and I was sort of thinking about how those would be reinstalled, if they're just casually hung up on the wall, or if it's placed more specifically. That's the question.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I just had an exhibition in Los Angeles where I sort of arrived at the gallery with all these elements that I had made over the past year. So a lot of it was sewn and dyed kind of material things that related to garments and other sort of things that would be used in rural or industrial applications. I had a lot of found materials from a cow barn upstate, rusted chains and sort of old machine belts and cracked garden hoses and things like that. And also, when I got to the gallery, I took existing inventory out of the storage, and so I sort of laid out all this material and treated it as raw material to create, in sort of a span of a couple days, between 25 and 30 arrangements. I called them clusters of things sort of all looped and intertwined and kind of glommed together. And so yes, I used the improvisational approach, but there is, now they're fixed. So they all flatten and they all fold up, but the goal would be to recreate them in future exhibition modes, things like that. But that was a tricky, I wasn't sure how that would play out. But, that's the thing, you get attached. We were just talking about this, but you get attached to, there seems like there's so many possibilities, but then when you find the right one, it's in my mind, it's you immediately romanticize it, and it becomes it can't exist any other way. But that said, I'm kind of contradicting myself, because when I used the existing sculptures to make the new works, my theory is they can go back to being the first form. So now they have an alternate version. So, but they're still it's fixed within that. There's just two modes. There's not infinite modes.
And I think with the instance of Bollinger, it is. I mean, we're working off documentation, so it's he could have redone or reinvented the works when he was doing them, but we really are going off of set documents, set images, and can't really interfere in that. So it's kind of hard to say. And we have drawings and sketches of works that we don't know if they were actually realized ever because we don't have photography. So, for the rope pieces, he has a whole series of drawings downstairs that show them in different configurations, but we only have photography of one of those. So it's unclear whether there's potential works, or if they'd been reconstructed before, or if not. So these are those questions.
Did you guys ever encounter a contradiction between the image and the instructions for how to make the work, and sort of how to make a decision?
Well, I don't know. I think there's questions because, of course, with color photography, there was only the last show that he did where there's color images. So, for barrels, we didn't know whether only the curator of the show really is who was doing this research, but didn't know, the exact shade of green or So there's these questions that come up. I don't know if there's a direct contradiction between the instruction or.
No, I think Christiana is as an art historian and a curator who's worked with actually a few of these kinds of work. She did a retrospective of Fred Sandbeck that she started while he was still alive, and then he died, and then had to finish the show without him. And so she's kind of not foreign to the situation of having to realize artists' projects that without the artist there. But I think, so she was I think actually she has very, very strong feelings about having enough documentation and knowing that a work had been realized in his lifetime by him. Because he was also, the archives and his correspondence with his gallery and other people, he did execute, the rope pieces that are downstairs, that vertical rope piece was installed. He couldn't go to Europe for when attitudes become formed, so Richard Serra installed that piece for him because Richard was going to be there. So there are very specific drawings which are actually downstairs, we have the actual drawings that he did to show Richard how to install it properly, and then he always asked for photographs of the installation and then wrote back about and critiqued the installation. And I think there was something between being very controlling about it, but also being a little bit that's not quite how I wanted it, but it's okay.
A compromise.
I put it in the middle, but he put it down here, and that's okay. And I think that's, so for the later generations, it brings up this whole question, and I would throw this to all of you as artists, because I think this question about, there was a certain kind of casualness, I think, about, he was really not precious about the actual objects themselves. They existed while they were shown, and then he didn't actually care that much, it seems, from his correspondence, about what happened to them. Of course he wanted to make money off of them, to support himself, but I don't think beyond that, he was all that concerned about them as, having a legacy as objects. Why store a piece of chain link fence when you can just make it again? There's really no reason. But I think that also, now we can look at that, and that contributes to the fact that he's not that well known, that his legacy is kind of ignored because there was no extant work.
Well, he also had a position against it because he wanted, he insisted that his works be sold at the least amount possible, that the gallery would go for probably. Actually, I have a quote that I found kind of interesting from Bollinger. The show must be kept simple. Selling work is not primary. The quality of the work is primary, and the quality and coherence of the show is next in importance. If possible, sales must be sacrificed to this end. That must be done. And so for him, there was this idea of, a quality, project or exhibition or artwork versus sales, and it seems that had an effect in how we know his work today. So yes, and to go back to Mary, throwing that back at you guys and to hear your thoughts.
I've recently had to start writing instructions for installing pieces because I can't go everywhere stuff goes, and rather than ship a lot of materials, I like for it just to be gotten wherever the show is or whatever. So it's funny because I kind of like this idea, like, you gotta hop on one foot and bark like a dog. I mean, I'd love to put that in. Whatever, just to give me a laugh. But I think it's funny, no matter, it's like I've realized, like, I can be so descriptive, or at least what I think, and I'm making so many assumptions, you know, because I've made it before, or it's something that came from me, so I know how it's meant to be made, right, in my mind. But then you give somebody else an instruction, and the interpretation is so wide, you know? I mean, it's like, it was funny, there were some instructions somewhere, I don't remember where I saw it, of his, where it's like, he has, like a clamp on a piece of rope, and it's like not this long, mm-hmm. you know, and to me that's like, right, I would forget to say that, like, it can't be that long. So it's funny, and I also like sort of his embracing what to me becomes kind of an ephemeral quality of these sculptures that are so big and bold, you know. It's like all of a sudden they can just sort of dissolve back into the world. I like that.
I quite like the fact that he does not care about his artwork itself, that they don't have to be transported, you just trash them and then you remake them. It's exactly the way I work. But then you have the problem that sometimes you can't go there to install it, and then you have to write instructions. I wrote as well, like, instructions, and I forgot most of the stuff, which was the most important thing. So there is no solution for that, actually. You really have to somebody who trusts you. And actually, I guess that he trusted Richard Serra that he would install it properly, and he probably did, and then he trusted him that he also can change stuff. But actually, I like not to have any changes, or like things which happen in chance. So I would never say, no, it's okay that it's on this side, okay, the line is a little bit more further, but sometimes you can't change it anymore. But I also ask for photographs, which might be even quicker than in these times back, so you have to make a photo and send it. So it's much easier. But still, it still doesn't work. So they keep sending me photographs. I really want to see, and I really want to control it, and I feel bad about it. I don't want to be a control freak, but still, it's just my work. I can be there. I would love to have the supervision of it.
Yeah. It's kind of like, you know, we've all been embarrassing teenagers or preteens, and like, you can't change that. And sometimes I'm just like, okay, just let it be embarrassing. It's okay, you know, and just go with it, and you learn from it anyway. Right.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think, I'm very envious of like that hands-off approach. It sounds so much easier than all the logistics I feel like I encounter. I'm definitely, I wouldn't say that's a tenet of my work at all. I'm pretty attached to things like I mentioned, and there's a lot of labor that goes into the work that, you know, I can't like leave it at the exhibition site or give instructions to throw it out or something. But I think for me, I think a lot about the problems of transport and storage, and sort of this last show for me and reusing older works really was inspired by, or sort of, those logistics of this accumulation of work that sort of builds up for a sculptor over time, and just what to do with that, and even just the format of the show is sort of modeled after a storeroom, or some place where things kind of get hung up and they're out of use but they're in use. And I'm really interested in those ideas, and kind of collapsibility, and making the sculpture as kind of modular so it can pack down and transport easily. Those are kind of interesting problems I like to solve, but in terms of just like the ephemerality of the actual materials, I don't have that direct connection to his work.
I just want to throw out there that the Los Angeles-based artist Catherine Andrews makes really great videos on how to install her work. So if
I learned that too. I did this. It was too late.
Are there any other questions?
so much as an observation. When I was downstairs looking at the drawings, it seemed like his work is fully formed and with precision in the drawings. Like with a drawing, it seemed like there's the idea and the work exists because of that drawing, and that it can be realized any number of times. And I don't know enough about him, but it seems like the core of his work is probably philosophy, because he takes the wall and the floor as a ground. So maybe it's Husserl, I don't know. I don't know, that's just my observation.
Well, I think Bollinger is also very interested in science. He studied engineering, so I think that's really a basis of a lot of the ideas in his work, and also I think probably affected the process of coming to the works, where drawing and sort of making these diagrams became a way to visualize an object. So I feel like
I wondered, has any of his work really affected your work in any specific way? Particularly to Virginia Overton.
Like where? I've thought about it a lot, I guess. I said in the beginning just that I was exposed to his work when I was in undergrad through some images in slides. But, so I guess it's sort of in there, and I don't know, there are certain things I admire about his work that I don't have the, what's the word, discipline. I lack discipline, I think. And it seems like that's something that he had in a way. To involve himself in his practice and really think about it and draw and write and do all these things sort of with it, and I think that's one thing that I maybe could learn a little more. Yeah, I don't know.
Is there anything about his work or related work that you guys find totally irrelevant?
I find it totally irrelevant to my work. I can't say I was inspired.
No, I don't think any of you were inspired.
Because I really don't know much about him, and there are not so many artworks still. But of course, I know that I really they say, there was a guy before he made also was all together with these Sarah guys, and I was super inspired by Sarah because it's the first person I met not personally, but as an art, this artwork. And I didn't know, then if I would have known it probably, I would know if I would have done maybe works I did. It's very interesting about this throwing the graphite and with this, I really admire his work, his way how he's using water, like this really simple fact of water, like the most simple, the most cheapest thing you can work with actually, and just showing this ability of being always in one line. That's something that's super impressive actually for me. And I'm gonna keep more thinking about this. And not that we have to learn everybody something from tonight, or promise, but definitely have to think more about this work.
I think for me, I wouldn't, and not Bollinger specifically, because as I said, I wasn't familiar with his work in particular, but in terms of, other sort of post-minimalists, and I guess this gets back to the question of, why is it still relevant? And it's interesting when you look at a list of who's considered a post-minimalist artist, you sort of see it never went away. It's not like a resurgence, really. It's just this constant sort of fabric, especially within sculpture. And I didn't realize that or ever like have that conscious thought until I sort of started looking into this. I'm like, oh, okay. So it's just this, like I said, this territory that's constant. But I think it's because it's a really successful strategy. It's like a really useful sculptural language that just keeps getting new meanings. I mean, for me in my work, like I use it very consciously to sort of, I think of it as like cooling off or sort of neutralizing sort of these other like very human, emotional, gritty aspects in the work, which I recognize are kind of, I don't know, they're more about the body and just these things that like are a little, I don't know, intense or kind of, I even find like off-putting sometimes. So I sort of use like it as like a ground. I use like a language of, like a minimalist sort of language that I recognize refers to this historical work. But I use it, I guess I use its baggage to sort of do this like, have this like kind of stoicizing effect. I don't know. And I think like other artists, a lot of artists do too, because like I said, I just think it's a testament to what a great, like interesting, flexible language it is. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's never lost. It's like also thinking by doing is something which is always.
Yeah.
It's always like it's fun to do things, and that's it's not just. That's what people did between 1940 and 60 or something like this. It's.
Yeah. I mean, it really honors materiality. It really like and there's always new materials, and there's so, like I said, now there's so many materials. So it's just like, very. Like I said, just flexible way of working with material.
I was just wondering, it doesn't.
Is the sound coming through?
No.
It did there.
Oh, I just had a question about these approaches and materials in terms of gender, because it's definitely something that came up a lot in minimalist work, like with Anna Chav and the rhetoric of minimalism and power. And we had a recent review, actually, and one of the writers actually discounted this work because on the grounds that it was feminine, in terms of comparing it to, I'm sorry? Wimpy or sissified, I think was the word used. And I thought that was just really interesting that that the work was discounted, on those terms. And I don't know, I was just wondering if gender is an issue that comes up in your work. And I mean, at Kilian, I sort of remember us having a conversation about that, like maybe as something productive, because I remember you have these sort of soft bed-like forms that are concrete, and Virginia, I don't know if I remember like something like that maybe coming up. So I was just curious if that is something that's problematic or something that's productive or something that's an issue at all in your work.
It's not an issue at all for mine. I'm just doing it, and I don't think that it's especially male what I'm doing, masculine.
I've been conscious of using the language as a mask. I didn't read the review you're talking about, so I don't understand that critique there, especially of the show. But I definitely use it as a foil for things in my work because I use craft techniques, and I totally speak from a female perspective in my work. Like, I definitely use it as a balancing effect because of the sort of, I feel like it has an authoritative, typically masculine language or affect to it.
Well, I mean, and the post-minimalists also were responsive to the minimalists, and by incorporating more of the handmade, which I think, has a history of being gendered. So I think that's, I think Bollinger's kind of, incorporating that into his work already, and then I think, as time progresses, it opens up, and I think that's maybe how it plays into work. I don't know, but did you want to say? No. No comment?
No comment.
No, it is that I think about also maybe as a balance to sometimes break down these things when I found it that it's too tense and maybe too masculine. And it's true that I try to give it a break somehow, to just in a very simple way. Yeah, maybe that's like the concrete show, like very soft, and I take this power away. Also, the respect or disrespect against the architecture is something I like a lot. Like to take all this respect away by just using parts of it for my show, or dismantle parts and put it back.
I always shy away from like that whole gender thing. You know, my work's been called macho and lots of other.
Not wimpy.
Not wimpy, and I never knew really how to take that. Like macho seems cool. Like I love muscle cars and stuff like that. So to me, I've always equated that with being good. But then, I sit back and I think about it. I'm like, when I was in my early 20s, I worked for a feminist artist, and she sort of hammered it in me, like power is femininity, and so it's always been, and it was, when I was kind of young and in a formative stage, so I feel like I've always kind of had that weird tension, but I grew up in a really agrarian kind of life where you had to be tough or else, like you couldn't kind of make it. So to me, it didn't really have a gender associated with it as much as just like survival, and I think that I'm sort of dancing all around the subject, but.
One last question.
I was wondering about the reasoning behind the choice of materials in Bill Bollinger's work, and then also three of your work, because it seems like you guys have been talking about the works being made of materials that are incredibly, sorted out beforehand. Like they're very intentional. He went out and he purchased these things that he already had in his mind that he wanted to get. But I wonder if he had like a stockpile of just random industrial crap that he would go in and like pick things up and see how they sort of fit together and sort of feel it out, or pick certain things that would inspire certain, analogies between other materials. And I'm kind of reminded of it's a video, I don't know if it's still on the SculptureCenter website, but it's with Getty Sibony, and he's saying how he just has all this stuff, and it's round, and he just tries to make it levitate, and that's how, like, a piece is, eventually made. And so, I don't know, I was wondering about the relevance there, if there's what the intentionality is behind the material all the time.
I'm trying to wrap my head around it.
I think it's for both. Yeah, if it's to respond for Bollinger, because maybe some of you have responses about the way you do this. I think I actually think that he found materials that would do what he wanted to do. And it was a little bit of a back and forth, from the way I understand the research, between, finding the right material and to manifest the ideas that he was interested in. So I think this idea about like water is really important for him. Like, yes, it's this idea that water is, finds its level, and that's what it does. But I think there's a metaphor in this work that is maybe at odds a little bit with contemporary practice, that he was not at all afraid of having the work have metaphorical meaning and poetic meaning in that sense, so that for him water like, not only was it just this physical material that does this thing, but that represents a really existential idea about the universe and the way we exist in the world, and that water is a ground in the same way the earth is a ground, and that these are really profound ideas about our existence. And I think that, the work for him embodies that sort of thing. And I think it's hard in our era to allow the work to have that kind of metaphorical relationship. And maybe that's the way to kind of convert your question to the panel. Or tell me I'm wrong.
Yikes.
Sorry. Well, in my work, I don't speak about metaphors, actually. The things I use is the things I know, the materials I find everywhere, and they just what they are. When I use salt, it's not like salt is everything is consisted like 90% or whatever is like made of salt, and then it's just the thing which is available for me.
Are you thinking about the material first, or are you thinking about a certain effect that you're trying to achieve?
It's most of it, it's the material that I find, or that I think about material, or just you know it, that you have it, and then you know, that material is doing this, and I could use this for my artwork.
My work is really metaphorical. I think it's of it as being really very narrative. It's sort of like a grand narrative that's abstract. It's like about the history of relationships between people and work animals and a landscape, and sort of bodies over time for survival being kind of tied and tethered to each other. And so when I'm working with materials, I choose ones that are will start to speak about that are utilitarian, and I dye things because they're like body fluids, and sometimes I worry my work is like too much of a sort of story that no one can read, but I definitely think of each thing as kind of playing a role in a metaphor or something that's descriptive of something.
Still no comment.
I'm like, next.
Well, maybe we should, I think it's about time to close up. I would like to thank Rachel, Kilian, and Virginia for speaking, and for all of you for coming out, and thanks.
That was good.